Welcome to the show. This is the Magician and the Fool podcast, episode 62. My name is Dominic. I am one of the co-hosts. The other co-host's name is Janus, and he will be here shortly. Today we speak to mystic, artist, performer, evil mastermind, and good personal friend, Arun Joseph Ragan, who runs a modern Greco-Egyptian style temple in Portland, Oregon, and is constantly in the process of crafting ritual masks, banners, vestments, and other esoteric paraphernalia. You can find his work that we will be talking about pretty extensively in the episode at the Aruniverse, ARUNIVERSE, which has an Etsy page where you can purchase the aforementioned masks, banners, vestments, etc. And the other site is Hekanthros, HEKANTHAROS. And there is a Facebook page and a Patreon page associated with that. In the episode, we talk to Joseph about his personal praxis and his insights in working with antique religious and magical materials such as the Greek Magical Papyri. I found it really fun and interesting to talk to Joseph about some of these insights as they relate to his practice. He has a very unique way of looking at things, which is shaped by his consistent and persistent practice. As always, we want to say thank you to our Patreon supporters. Patreon literally helps us keep the show rolling. Running a podcast is not free. There are monthly expenses, so we appreciate any help that our listeners can offer. If you'd like to make a one-time or continuing donation to the show, find us on Patreon and do what makes sense for you. We dedicate this to Hermes and Asclepios. May any merits that we accumulate doing this work be distributed to all sentient beings, so that they, together with us, may equally realize awakening. Okay, welcome to the show. We are very happy to finally have this guest on the show. We've been waiting for a while for it to happen. I'm not sure why it didn't happen earlier. This is Arun Joseph Ragan, also known as Zygote, and I'm sure there are a few other names floating out there. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
So glad you're here.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're finally getting around to it.
Totally. So I definitely want to cover briefly how you got to where you are, as far as your practices, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, to keep it simple and short, because I'm so much more interested in the present and the future than I am with previous affiliations, but I do have to give credit where credit is due, and was definitely influenced by everything I've been a part of over the years. But just to simplify, I started with my first magical link really just being through the process of drawing and of trying to craft, usually out of paper, but out of anything else I could find as well. companions, and the idea of the animation of, or at least the personification of materials in order to create beings was just like constant urge, the constant thing that propelled me as a little kid. And so the first, cut to Alabama, sometime in the late 70s, a little like 4-year-old or 5-year-old me, sitting on the floor with having cut the little red devil logos out of the wrapper of Underwood's Deviled Ham. It has these famous like little red little devil figures in a little vest with a little trident. I cut those out and would just play with them as my little companions, and was just in delight. And I feel like there was like a magical link was either formed there or became obvious that these little satyr beings were just like the best thing I'd ever seen. And so I just played with them. And that kind of combination of like mythical figures and the animation of designs upon paper became a lasting theme. So there was that. And then cut forward a little bit when I'm in a little bit older, still always doodling, always drawing, always living on page. I experienced as a, like adolescent, kind of going through the stage of like the torment of all of the bodily hungers of just, I want something sweet now. Now I want something salty after I had something sweet. Okay, I'm not hungry, but I still want to eat stuff. Now I'm tired. Oh, I want to stay up all night though. I want this. And it's just like, everything being a push-pull, a need or a want or a something that has to be relieved regarding the body, and that being this perpetual thing, just perpetual discomfort, perpetual appetite, and feeling that all the time, and kind of beginning to despair of realizing that incarnate existence is just nothing but a series of things that have to be relieved. And then picking up the page, picking up a tablet of paper, and beginning to writing on something, getting a little inspiration and beginning to doodle, to draw, and then to just get all the way into, page after page of developing a theme, then hours and hours going by, and me not tracking whether or not I had to go to the bathroom, not tracking whether or not I need to drink water, not tracking what time it is, whether or not I'm tired, because I was completely in a space where there were no appetites, there were no pressures to be relieved. There were no like, what do I do next? Definitely no boredom. Like none of the things that is the adolescent body torments one with. I felt like doing that, creating in some way, but usually in the form of drawing. I would shift at that moment from something that needs and wants and just an endothermic reaction that just requires more energy put into it, but never can get there, can never get to satiety. I went from that state into, an exothermic reaction. Suddenly I'm, a fountain of energy. Like I don't need any inputs at all. I'm outputting and just and so that connection for me was kind of when the light switch was flipped as far as a relationship with the type of magical current that I feel determines my life. That's kind of like that first contact for me really was through the creative process of seeing myself transformed from an endless pit of appetites and needs and discomforts. Life, went from that to creating just like freely and with limitless energy and enthusiasm, and with fulfillment, total fulfillment, like not needing another person, not needing something to put in my mouth, not needing anything to relieve regarding my body in any way. My body just disappeared into its function of enabling contact between whatever it was that was being creatively explored or expressed and the page and the medium. And that kind of was the next, aha moment. And in the meantime, there was definitely always kind of the weird kid syndrome, always very, mythologically oriented, always very, I'm not going to like list off, little details to try to prove that I'm magic or anything. I just sort of had, just a usual weird kid. But the thing that was the meaningful connection was being able to shift from being something that just only needs, and shifting from that into something that is radiantly outputting and that doesn't require, and that is completely self-sufficient, because the thing that was an input suddenly has become like a beacon. There was that shift into the light switch being turned on whenever I was in the creative act, and then when I was not, I was just a typical kid. As soon as I could plug in to the creative process, I did. And my brother was kind of similar. We would spend nights and nights of just drawing in tandem, each in our kind of own way, in our own style, and the heavy influence of Egypt themes for the most part, especially for him. And I would try to incorporate other cultural themes, but always the iconography of ancient cultures was the most attractive thing in terms of themes. I did things a little bit more, like I would do mutant versions of everything. I was a very color outside of the lines kid, and he was the opposite. He was a very meticulous, creating things very precisely, like according to, like his thing was like creating 18th dynasty, kind of Middle Kingdom tomb art, with the proportionate grid, and everything being like, as according to the very precise language of iconography that determined, the quote unquote Egyptian look, for something to actually be like an official, like let's say, Seti the first tomb art, what would go on the walls there. Mm-hmm. It has like a formula to it in terms of the proportions and in terms of how it's done. And he was very good about that sort of thing. He was very soul in Virgo. And so, he was like the right hand of Hermes, and then right hand of Mercury. And then I'm, soul in Gemini, and sort of the left hand of Mercury. So I kind of mutate everything that I touch, whereas he was very good at perfectly reproducing things, perfectly creating like a very impeccable rendition.
So jump ahead, 20 plus years, you're still doing the same practice, I believe, right?
Yes. The function of what I serve creatively has not changed. It's kind of been put through a lot of adjustments and training, but the thing that I do, which is like, I'm not here to recreate something that already exists. I'm here to express what the forces that created that thing are doing now. I feel that it's like all these things are still active, or the ones that are. I mean, I think there are some that are not. In terms of like ancient deities and forces, I think a lot of them either fulfilled their purpose or moved on and got bored with us or something. There are some that are like not life current, but there are those that are, and that I think have great interest in the possibilities that are available with humanity in its current state, and that are very active and are very available for responding to petitions and forming relationships with people that want to engage them as sources of inspiration and enthusiasm.
You know what I like?
Yes.
I like the fact that your imaginal life in childhood was something that ended up being a prefiguration of your theurgic work later. I mean, it's almost like an echo backwards in time, of what you're doing now.
Yes, very much so. It's almost as if my adult life were conjured into being by magic done by myself as a child, when I had the same enthusiasms for the most part, the same fixations. The things that attracted me then are still, I'm creating now in the round, and out of materials, that I find around me, wearable / becomeable versions of the little satyrs that were on the deviled ham wrappers. It's the same idea has simply germinated and has incorporated more media, and has come into a situation where I now lead, processions of seasonal celebratory processions of people dressed as these beings, and they get to have the kinetic element added as well. And We get to be them, they get to be us, celebrating co-presence with them rather than just playing with them as toys.
So it sounds to me like you're engaging your work as an active participant in cosmosis. Like your artistic creativity is a microcosmic enaction of the cosmic creativity. So you're participating in demiurgy.
Yes.
In a positive.
In the sense of Ta, or of the maker.
Thank the maker.
Not demiurge as in the view of demiurge meaning blind idiot god, ultimate prison warden. That's not how I see the demiurge. It's definitely more of that total function of the creative process that includes all particular functions of the creative process. And I engage a particular function of the creative process, and therefore I am the local agent of the total function of the creative process, or the demiurge, along with every other being who is doing likewise.
Right. And I guess like people who have listened to our podcast know what we mean by that. But then, some people who are newer to the podcast may not be familiar with that. But in theurgy, demiurgy is not a negative. It's not pejorative. It actually describes the way that the theurgist, the divine magician, is participating in the act of cosmic renovation, the perpetual renovation of the cosmos through the infusion of life force via eudaimonia, among other things.
Yes. It only degenerates into the blind idiot god screaming "I am I" in a room by himself at midnight, if you allow it to, or if you fall too far into solipsism and lose connection with all of the other radiant creative forces that are around you. And it's one of the dangers of solo path fixation upon particularly a premature engagement with some of the practices that one might be introduced to, especially without a guide. One can fall too far down the solipsistic looking glass rabbit hole and end up divorced from all of the other fragments of Godhead that are operating around you. And the result of that is you become a wonderful demonstration of the negative connotations of the demiurge. And that is the being who genuinely believes that they are the only center of the universe. And
I think that's a great point, and a great warning, because that is the path that a lot of people find themselves on, is the solo path. And you don't know what you don't know when you're on that path. You don't have someone to direct you, obviously, because it's a solo path. And so there are a lot of dangers there, as you're pointing out.
Yeah, you don't have the properly timed embarrassments and humiliations administered as you realize your blind spots. You have your blind spots pointed out by other people who, if they are good friends, pull you aside and say, by the way, maybe you need to be aware of there's this thing you do. And then you're able to, after you get over, if you take it personally, then once you get over that, you then realize like, oh, that was the whole reason I'm part of this group, is to have things like that pointed out so I can level up and move on from my own ignorance. Or if you get good at not taking it personally, then that process can happen pretty rapidly and relatively painlessly. But for most of us, it's really just like crawling down the path of perpetual humiliation until you finally get your major blind spots exposed, and then you can become a little bit more of a well-rounded person who plays well with others. And that's ultimately what I want to be, is a well-rounded person who plays well with others. I don't want to define myself just in terms of, these affiliations that I passed through and had benefit from, and then kind of graduated from into like, and now you got to actually do the thing. And so, yes, I was part of Temple of Psychic Youth and was part of the Ordo Templi Orientis, and they were great and they were lovely, and I had my time with each. But I am a spiritual bachelor. I'm not going to marry into these groups permanently or assume the missionary position for anyone. I am sort of, I have my fun, and I had a lot of wonderful relationships with those organizations and the currents that they represent. And they did get me to the next place. And from there on, I wanted to continue on my own. And I'm more interested in what happens next after initiation than I am in just like, what initiations do I have? It's more like, and what are you doing with it? And, what is your relationship with the forces represented by the symbols that were part of that initiation? Have you met it yet? Or are you just still, fondling the symbol upon the altar and rearranging them? Or, are you just constantly dialing up the reality that you want to experience? Or are you exiting the temple and walking out into the big sexy universe and encountering and meeting what it was that you were asking for and actually engaging with it? And I'm in that stage now, and it just means it's, in one sense, yes, I am definitely the result of all of my influences, and I am, I have, much gratitude to give to many. Also, in another sense, I'm on my own, and it's just like me and the universe working it out. And I see from both of those points of view. I don't like to get too caught up in organizations and in defining myself according to, some special guy in his book or whatever. But at the same time, I cannot pretend that I'm somehow completely self-generated. I definitely am the sum of my influences, but then all of those influences caught fire when they were put in contact with the Daimons, and the result of that dumpster fire is that I get to create by its light.
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Can we talk a little bit about what you do, why you're here with us tonight? Like, what is it that Arun does? We know,
Okay. The full expression of what I do, where you can kind of see it all at once, is in the form of seasonal celebratory processions, ritual processions, something that a pompe, or a basically a little magic parade. And the form that takes is I create masks and regalia and vestments and garlands and banners, and they include, of course, eventually there will be more sistre, or like we'll have a lot more noise-making things. I kind of have a few things like that, but just like imagine a fully vestmented and ritually masked, theatrically masked congregation of people bearing incense and bearing vessels of lustration and bearing banners upon which there are printed and collaged or otherwise affixed emblems, appropriate to a god of the seasons. Right now, we're just doing them on, summer solstice was the most recent one, where we went up on top of Mount Tabor and kind of went from one end of the park to the other and back as a solemn yet joyous procession. And before that, of course, was the spring equinox. And I'm right now committing to doing them once per season, and just, in that classic four corners of the year. But I do intend to include more. The one that started first, though, it's completely for whatever reason, is 13 years ago, we started doing the Krampuslauf, or like a winter procession on December 5th for Krampusnacht. And that kind of really kind of stirred something of like, oh, like I really want to do processions for the other quadrants of the year as well. But it took forever to do it because I think people are just really stirred by a demon parade in early December. And it takes a while I realize it's going to take a while to generate interest in the rest of the seasons. But that's a detail. Back to what I do. It's the goal ultimately is to have a group of people who are interested in the vocal and ritual and contemplative aspects of this work as well, such that the chants that we are singing as we do these processions are derived, many of them, from the voces magicae of the Greco-Egyptian Magical Papyri, or the Nomina Barbara, taking those that are applicable and that can be translated musically, and having people, who get together with me for chanting circles at my temple space to kind of build up the familiarity and get people plugged into the current, so to speak. And then the masks and the vestments that they wear are created with the intention of them being talismanic in the sense of inhabited, or at least in the sense of them being a way through which the forces that they represent can be present and can be embodied through the celebrant who is wearing them. And part of that is the fulfillment of the relationship that is my long-term defining significant other level relationship that I have with Daimonis and the theoi that the Daimonis are sent by or emanated by. That idea of this is for the sources of my inspiration, for the spirits, let's call them, that I invoke. I give them opportunities of embodiment and form through creating masks and vestments and for them, and having processions through which they can walk among us as us. And in exchange, I receive enthusiasm and inspiration. And so there's the exchange of embodiment for enthusiasm, or embodiment for inspiration. The voltage comes from them and keeps me very, very, very busy all the time, working on creating all of these things, always creating masks, always creating vestments, and always working towards ultimately having, a full year's calendar of processions available, and always working towards practicing and sharing the chants and the names of power and holy words with those who then will eventually join me in kind of forming, sort of hermetic choir, but not really, not quite a choir so much as those who would like together to share their voices for the purpose of invoking the forces that animate our world, that bring to life our world, and that fill our lives with enthusiasm, inspiration, and joy. And ultimately, what the people who participate get out of it, ideally, is the inspiration, is the enthusiasm, such as I experience. And what the non-corporeal participants get out of it is times during which they can consensually experience co-presence with humans, those who are going forth, representing them, or going forth as them. So that, for example, the nymphs and the satyrs of the summer solstice gathering, I like to think that those forces represented by the Satyroi and Nymphae, the forces of the freshwater and the saltwater and of the trees and breeze and all of that, were among us, and not just among us, but were there as us, and that their enjoyment, their pleasure at experiencing through the rather sophisticated sensors of the human nervous system of the participants, that is a part of the offering. Like the offering is to be here as us, and from the point of view of the celebrants, they get to enjoy the experience of co-presence, of feeling that there's more here than usual inhabiting the form.
Sure.
And I really like to emphasize like the idea of consensual co-presence with spirits, as opposed to always having a narrative around possession as being like the only way that there can be more than more than one presence, within the context of someone's body. There's never just one presence within somebody's body, but there's a space which is all of it, every inch, densely haunted. There are times when we can experience more relate more to and go with or live with that which is already there, which is there's so much, in every particle of space. I feel like in my vision of the cosmos, it's just densely haunted, and it's not just haunted by the dead. There's just a lot happening everywhere. And
so Joseph, what sorry to interrupt. I was curious, since you touched on this just now, your view on the spirits of the Greek Magical Papyri in particular, that are connected to the voces magicae. Do you see them as kind of cogs in the machinery of reality, or do you see them more as kind of these beings hanging out in a castle up in the clouds? What's your perspective on these beings, these spirits?
I see them as so, like, if you were to like drill all the way down to the smallest unit that you could, if that were possible, you have these like particles, every particle being a self, whether we're talking about an atomic particle or talking about something that's just correlates to that for this metaphor. But I feel like every point in space is not just inhabited, but every point in space is animate, and those form together into little rivulets and currents and breezes and tributaries, which can be thought of as, either as like a little wisp that's, part of a spirit, or it can be thought of as a host of spirits, depending on how what your magnifying glass is tuned to, how close it is to it, and that these together form, spirits upon spirits upon spirits, form tides and currents that then become a little bit more perceptible and recognizable to us. And within that, yes, I think that there are, particular and individual selves and parts of particular selves that might have once lived, that can be identifiable and that one can tune in on and get to come in close, so to speak. But that I think there's just countless of them, and the words that they respond to, what's responding, I believe, is many spirits that compose currents that get set in motion, by those words. For I don't know what it is about the sounds, and certain shapes cause currents of these spirits to respond. And I'm using a very sloppy train wreck between energy model and psychological model and spirit model because it's kind of like it's really neither of those, but
it kind of has to be all of the above. I think
one can grab it from those handles depending on what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
I find that just in terms of pragmatism, I have this, model that, however sloppy that might sound, it works very well for me to understand what I'm doing. Particular presences, distinct persona, other selves definitely are there and definitely emerge. And I experience this largely in the form of, let's say I'm creating a mask, and it was by doing this, so I'll just use it as the example. So creating a mask for a particular epithet of Hecate. And so like starting like, okay, I have, kind of an idea of what I want to do. I want to make, there's a particular name, and I'm wanting to make a mask that's themed on that name. And at first it was, I am making an image of, this particular name of Hecate. I'm going to do that. So that's what I'm doing. So I get to work on the mask, and then as I'm working on it, and it kind of like, there's a moment where it just catches momentum, where it no longer requires effort. It's now like, I feel now that the stone is rolling down the hill. I'm not pushing it up the hill. And there's this, suddenly I notice from the material that I'm working on and how it's being composed into the face, is that there's like a very distinct and surprising face will begin to emerge. Something that was still, I guess, connected with the theme, but is not what I had in mind. And but is so distinct and is so obviously not to be changed. And I'm like, who are you? And this is one of the signs, I think, of connection or of contact or of a successful link when I am creating one of these, is when I am surprised, when I am there's a combination of feelings of where it's kind of a little bit like I'm frightened and a kind of a little bit like I'm in love happens when a face will begin to emerge that is like so distinct, so obviously like this is somebody. This isn't just like a theme. This is like this somebody is now, this is organizing around a face that's there. Like I'm holding a face, and around that face that is now organizing the materials as I'm, adjusting it and moving it. And suddenly this thing emerges that shocks. And I came to my personal understanding of what that is that each of the epithets of the theoi, of the gods, has its host, one of those currents that I was talking about, and a host of daimones. And in that host, if you call upon that name, if you call upon the holy words associated with that name, if you focus on the sigils associated with that epithet or what have you. But in my case, it's just if you just call upon that name, and if you show your intent to give form to that aspect of the god, that answers to that epithet, or that is signified by that epithet, there comes to you the host of that epithet. But in particular, there comes in that host, there is there's a particular daimon who then shows up and is part of the work. And those are distinct. Like they're not homogeneous. There's like they participate in a current, that's kind of like as if there was like a breeze coming from the god, and that breeze is made of countless selves, countless souls, whatever. I don't know the extent of the magnitude. It really feels though that there are many in the host of the god, and a breeze can come from the god that is composed of the many that serve that aspect of the god, of the epithet that comes in answer to calling upon that name. And then in that host, there's one who then shows up and is like, okay, I'm gonna do this with you, and that comes about in the form of what I'm inspired to do, and then also in the form of what emerges. No matter what it is that I think that I'm doing, there's something that emerges. And when it surprises me, and when it is like so much more than the sum of its parts, and when there's a point where the effort, ceases to be effort, and there's a feeling, there's a switch, a flip of the switch internally that I feel that indicates the presence of and influence of one of the daimones that has come in answer to my invocation of my chanting or singing of the name or the formula, and of my intention to give form. When I begin a mask, I write the name of the epithet, often in a configuration. I'm obsessed with tetracti, so if there's a way that I can arrange it into a tetractys, but it doesn't have to be that. There's other shapes. Anyway, I'll put a glyph with myrrh ink if I'm feeling extra special, but with Sharpie if I'm just like feeling pragmatic and I don't want to stop the show in order to go grab something from an altar to do it with. But I will put the epithet upon the mask and then start building from there. And I find that when I do that, that's just one of the ways that I dedicate what I'm working on, the material, the medium that I'm working with, to the force that is going to ensole it, that is going to inhabit it, and ideally that is going to shape and guide the shaping of the mask itself. And it happens more often than not. When it doesn't happen, when I feel like, okay, this one represents a satyr or a nymph or a this or a that, and it's kind of like, this was practice. I don't know if I was just phoning it in, or it's just not the right time, or no one was available. But so that's fine, and it's great. And this was done through the practice of my hands, and is the result simple artifice, and that's fine, and that's great. And I have another little satyr mask that's cute. But when it goes above and beyond and suddenly starts revealing itself, and I'm like, okay, you're not what I thought I was making at the beginning, but I see that maybe it's someone up the chain of emanation or something whose selfhood and distinctiveness, is poking out, is piercing through, and is causing this mask to become something far more intense than I was expecting, or far more distinct. And it's become something where I no longer would say of such a mask that this is Hecate Kleidokos, or this is Hecate Nycteria, or rather than that, I would say this is a daimon of Hecate Urania, or this is a daimon of
Sure.
Hecate Phosphore, or whichever it is that comes about. And because there's obviously this is it no longer is quote unquote Hecate. It is of Hecate.
Sure.
It is
Right.
one of her daimones. And I found that once I switched to that understanding, it helped my work, and it helped my relationship to my work. Sometimes I do make something that I would call this is the mask, and it's a votive mask. It serves as an icon. It's ultimately, probably just going to go up on the temple wall behind the main Hecate altar, or it's going to go somewhere, because it is, this aspect, and it's very much high concept, but it's not personal at all. It's, an impersonal rendition of Hecate Ainalia, and that's beautiful and that's great, and those have their purpose. But the ones that feel special are the ones where it's obviously this is a daimon of Hecate Ainalia, and this is somebody who showed up and to whom this mask is dedicated, but obviously in whom this mask is seated, or this is or who is seated in this mask. There's a different feeling, and I kind of treat them differently. I treat them all, with respect as, sacred objects of art, but the ones that attain obvious personhood, I'm very careful with, and it's they're the ones I'm likely to be talking to as I'm puttering around the studio.
So it's funny, that leads right into something I was going to ask you. It sounds like the act of creation is a dialogue with the daimon.
Yes.
There's a reciprocity, it sounds like, where you're initiating the creative act, but then the daimon is entering into the creative act with you and guiding the act of creation, so that it in turn, the created, can become an appropriate eidolon for the spirit, really in an Egyptian terms, a ba for the daimon, who in turn is a ba for the god.
Yes.
Would you say that's accurate?
Yes. I definitely understand it in those terms, and that could also just be out of practicality. It's probably much more nuanced and complex than I can understand or express. But in terms of a need-to-know basis, I think that what you just described is what I feel I'm capable of comprehending, and probably is the extent to which I would actually need to know about it. And there's the extent to which I'm sort of like a consenting instrument. I feel, though, that I was designed, I can, biography back through my whole life and see how all of the influences and all of the experiences that shaped me, definitely appear to all be doing it towards fulfilling the function that I currently am. And it does feel, very much like there was a high degree of intentionality around. But this also could just be me making sense out of, the random chaos and meaninglessness in order to feel good about myself. But it does appear that I was, developed to fulfill a particular function, and not in a I'm special way, just more, because everyone, I believe, is. But it's just, I kind of see it that way. And I guess that the whole concept of true will or destiny or whatever gets into it. But I try to, rather than saying it's my will, I rather say saying it's my function, because I feel that at my best is when I am, a enthusiastically consenting instrument being used by something with greater wisdom and skill than I have.
Makes sense. Now, it's interesting, and I think many people are unaware these days of it, but masking is also very much an aspect of traditional magical practices, whether we're talking about the archaic world, whether we're talking about Africa, whether we're talking about indigenous European shamanism, for lack of a better word. I prefer to use that than witchcraft. Masking is something that is used in magic, and it goes back to the Greek persona, which we use for, of course, our egoistic construct. But really, the idea of persona is because they would put these masks on stage and become the gods that were in the play, like in an Aristophanes play or something. Literally, the mask is the persona, but then when you don the mask, you become whatever the mask is.
Yeah, precisely. And that's my understanding of it as well. And it's one of the few elements that you can, I know it's dangerous to use the phrase of being universal, but it's one of the found so frequently in so many places as a element in people's practice that you could think of it as a near universal element of ritual or of ceremony as experienced all over the world. Of course, there are exceptions, and I am not one size fits alling, or because there are always going to be more and varied expressions of praxis, and I don't want to do the it looks just like the thing that I do mistake. I do happen to notice that it seems to be an inevitable practice that emerges if somebody is engaging in, especially in radical transformation of one's own consciousness in a group, whether that be through theater or whether that be through shamanic ceremonies or whether that be through religious processions or whether that be through Dadaist happenings.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, that it happens spontaneously when you're working in a certain way. And I was going to mention it earlier, and Janice said it as well. You're tapping into a really traditional practices with what you're doing. And I think things are emerging for you because these are the things that have traditionally worked, or these are the things that have traditionally been done. The processions, the animation of statues, or in this case of masks. These are all very traditional practices, and I love what you do. And from seeing the masks up close and in person, they do capture the real essence of the beings that you're trying to kind of symbolize. And these are masks that are, in my opinion, museum-worthy pieces of art. And I really do hope for you that they do end up in some sort of museum or gallery.
Maybe if there's a point at which they want to be retired. Right. I think they want to be as part of shrines when they're not in kinetic use. True. And they want to be upon someone's face and adventuring around in the world, and lending body, I think is where they most want to be. And perhaps there's a point when they want to be decommissioned or retired. If they don't insist upon being thrown into a bonfire, they might end up in somewhere. Maybe there'll be a museum of retired magical paraphernalia.
Right.
That
well, I'm maybe more speaking to just the overall quality and artistry.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, these are really spectacular pieces. And so a lot of your inspiration and your techniques, I think you had mentioned the Greek Magical Papyri earlier. I feel like you get a lot of inspiration from those documents and from those works. How do you, I'm just curious about your general thoughts on the Greek Magical Papyri today, and maybe, or how you thought about it a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Has your thoughts about how these things work changed dramatically?
Yes. I had a period when late antiquity, and especially the Greco-Roman fusions and syncretisms, they used to be, but this was my brother's influence. It was just seen as like the degenerate area. Oh, this is it decayed, the perfect and pristine, isolate perfection of this signal that is, the Egyptian artistic style, that which makes something recognizably Egyptian. That otherness that is also still like so pure and perfect and so beyond time, yet obviously, from however many thousand years ago. Like that then changes when you do get that splicing with the Greek influences and Roman influences and what happened later. And that used to be interpreted as degeneracy. That, when growing up with my brother, was a perfectionist, there was this idea like this once perfect thing, this once perfect signal that we had, Egypt as Egypt, then intermixed with other cultures, and that was seen as sort of like a degeneration, and that resulted in. And I changed that completely, though, once I realized that the fusions and the admixtures of the Egyptian deities and Egyptian magical words, etc., during that period, suddenly agency was restored, rather than it being like, oh, these humans failed to keep the gift that they were given pure and perfect and separate from the rest of the world, which was how I grew up understanding it. Sure. Because I was seeing it through the lens of my brother's influence, and he was very much into the idea of, so this is perfection, and everything other than this is a failure to be that.
Right.
And I saw it that way too, because I was the little brother. I absorbed a lot of his stuff. But then once I realized that, I'm my own type of mutant, and what I do through my artwork is a form of mutation. It's, translating things into the bodies or forms that they want to have now, in the current place, which is not ancient Egypt at all. And I started seeing the period of late antiquity and the syncretism of it as the consensual admixture and intermingling of those Neteru that wished to participate in and influence the rest of the world after the close of the era that in which they lived on Earth, when the temples were maintained by the priesthoods and when the actual animate forms of the gods were here. When that stopped, and the occupation happened, there are those that quit, I believe, and there are those that continued, quite obviously, and were like, sure, show me the rest of the world. So Isis goes on and becomes like a Roman superstar goddess. Osiris becomes Serapis, and then Serapis then kind of like, hitchhikes as Jesus into the next age. And there's some of them wanted to meet the world and continue, and I give them the agency. I don't feel that they are entirely passive aliens that would die if their temple was failed to be perfectly maintained by their devotees. I feel like, once the temples were desecrated, something definitely did, and certain opportunities, I think, definitely left the earth at that time. Like there wasn't these, well-fed, centuries-old statues that had been consistently worshipped, and animate statues. So those, unfortunately, to the loss of us all, were desecrated. However, that the forces behind them have other means of influence and of participation in humanity's story, and they have agency. And I feel like there are those among them, maybe it's a minority of them, that were like, yeah, I still want to play though. Like I'm still interested in humanity. I still want to advent in various forms, whether through dreams and inspirations or through actually eventually developing a new cultus in a slightly different form with a different emphasis on a different continent with people who may or may not understand my original context at all. And so that's why we have, Sekhmet, and we have deities now more than ever, but it used to be, a handful of them, but, busy, like they have their own forming cults, and they are not perfect renditions by any means of the original cults. And some of them are perhaps not even recognizable as to how they were worshipped or what meanings they had in relationship to their devotees millennia ago. But there's apparently, if we were to admit they have agency, there is the desire to keep playing, to keep in relation, to maintain the relationships to humans, to humanity and its story. And I feel that the syncretism that happened in the late period was their means to do that. And I feel like, to some extent, there, it was willed, it was consented to. It wasn't just sort of like, oh no, you failed to keep your gods distinct from the interpretatio Romani or whatever, from the getting, folded into the idea that there's 7 or 12, primary gods, and this one is, of course, that one, and it's ... Odin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we want to avoid, taking that, at face value and reducing them all to a paint by numbers, where every god that has mercurial qualities is Mercury. I definitely don't want to flatten them to that extent.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel that by participating in that, even though that wasn't like their original meaning and context, and I feel though that they kind of like were able to kind of piggyback upon that sort of like weird, flattening and simplifying of everything into 7 planetary gods or 12 zodiacal gods. And I feel like they're kind of unpacking from that and are kind of returning to their distinctiveness and are now, we know more about them, and because of the wonders of archaeology, and centuries have gone by since people were writing about them, as if there was really, as if, Mercury exactly was Hermes, exactly was Thoth, exactly was Odin. Like, I feel like those gods are now kind of getting out of that little mercurial vehicle that they have been packed into, and are now stretching their legs and getting busy with humanity as themselves a little bit more. Their distinctiveness and their personal divine qualities, I think those are being restored to them after them all being seen just as the mercurial current or the Venusian current. Like, I feel like the distinct deities that participated in those currents are now kind of have enough interest in them as themselves, and there's enough archaeological background that has been revealed that we know more about them and know more about how to approach them as beings in and of themselves, and not just as fusions with all of the other gods that kind of have something in common, or at least appeared to the Romans. All of what I just said impacts my understanding of the PGM, because the PGM is a mosaic made from many broken religions, many traditions, many pantheons, many magical languages that had been crushed and shattered under the heel of empire. And the last participants, last generation to participate, in those traditions, were then pulling together what fragments they could and trying to assemble something that had its center removed, because God no longer obviously lived in the old temple, which is, now a barracks, or, it's no longer the context that was so obvious in the era of the temple traditions. So now, as it's shifting from being, a magical religion to a religious form of magic, the pieces were not kept separate, though, that made that mosaic. All the shattered pieces of Judaism, of the Kemetic religions, of Hellenic religions, etc., were now being mixed and matched. And then suddenly people started from a, high need situation with a very pragmatic lens, started creating these beautifully polyglot chimerae, or chimerae, the idea of creating these Frankenstein mutant practices that included Frankenstein mutant gods that created, these chimerical creations that
and a lot of frankincense.
Yes, exactly. Steins and steins of frankincense. And they created these things that were wonderfully reminiscent, of the little doodles that I would make as a kid of, let's create this like chimerical, combination of all these different features of animal, let's say, together into a single creature. Well, that was sort of like a process happening, with the gods. And so we end up with things such as the acephalos, the headless one. And people's trying to say, well, who is it? And it's like, that's the wrong question. It's not who is it. It's this is something that you can piece together the influences going into it, but you can try to recognize among the voces magica, among the words and names by which it's invoked, but really you just have to look at its function and see that its function is indicated, by the qualities that you're saying that it does, and you're realizing that it's that part both of of the tetragrammaton deity, but also in some ways of Set and of Osiris and of all of these other names, that it's kind of them as doing a certain thing.
Very nicely put. I like that.
Well, also to interject, I like your point, the Frankenstein analogy, because another name, and it's not accidental, another name for Frankenstein, the story Frankenstein, is the modern Prometheus.
Yes.
And Prometheus is the Titan. I hate to say, Titans are gods. They're just a different race of gods. But he is the divinity, I should say, who is associated with Metis, which has to do with skill and craft and creativity. And he's also the shaper, the one who gave form to human beings. So he's like, you're engaging. So he's a demiurgic figure associated with artistry and craftsmanship and the using of the divine fire in creation. And so your analogy is actually apt, because you're using that same formative fire of Ta or Hephaestus or Prometheus to produce these sort of aggregate eidolons.
Yes, I completely agree. And the idea of how they emerge, how they kind of like advent among us, the work that you're referring to now, the modern Prometheus or Frankenstein, was a great example of that, of how the themes of creation and of how do you God, what constitutes the form of a human, or is the human body, and is having a human body available, what makes it a human being, and what is that something, what is the fire of Prometheus that changes it from being a collection of organs into being a living creature that is or has a self. And similar with the cobbling together of these names and of these words and of these composite deities, they're the more than the sum of their parts. There's kind of putting together, sometimes in some of the invocations, you'll have several different languages, sometimes even in the same just a passage, which is thought of as even like a single name, of like a seven word formula, like the Maskello, and you're trying to like piece together, like, where did this come from, where did that, and you're like, well, that's Egyptian, but it's right after that, that's recognizably Greek. And you see that these pieces of fragments of different traditions that have come together, something then happens with some of them, not all of them, but with some of them, then it does get animated, it gets ensouled, it gets inhabited. For some reason, that fire of Prometheus, that inspiring enthusiasmos that animates and brings something into life and into self, strikes it somehow. And so you'll have a string of words, which, if you were to just analyze them in terms of what language is this from, what's it trying to say, it's dead and broken. It's like, no, this is just like some degenerate, broken several languages that someone tried to put together, because I guess they were trying to imitate magic words that they saw someone say. You could look at it that way, and in that context, it's dead or broken or degenerate. But when you realize that, no, those things were put together from several different traditions, and they were put together in such a way that the lightning bolt came, like the animating fire of Prometheus, that then made it like an obvious something important enough that it's like you have people then using it and copying it and passing it around and experimenting with it, and it becomes like a thing in itself, rather than just like an attempt to say a particular Hebrew prayer that then got some Greek added, and then an Egyptian word for good measure. Rather than that, it's no longer those parts. It is now, when you have those 7 words in a row, or when you have that shape, or even something that approximates it, it develops its own momentum, and it kind of develops its own faith or its own influence. And that's the thing about it that was so fascinating to me, with seeing the kind of broken, multilingual, multi-religious, multicultural, and also not good examples of, in their original context, the Greeks in the wrong. It's like it doesn't even work if you were to try to like take the words and try to make them work. It's like they're broken examples of their own languages. And you look at that, and then you realize, but these are the words. These are the words that you shouldn't change. These are the nomina barbara. It is no longer Greek. It's no longer Egyptian. It's no longer Hebrew. The misspellings, keep them. It is something that worked. It's something that became a thing in itself. It's no longer just fragments of other things. And whatever that quality of life is that is imparted to a body to make it, not just like a random assembly of parts, but to make it a self. Somehow that quality was imparted to these phrases. And that makes me relate to them, because I'm not from Egypt, I'm not from Greece, I'm not from Rome, I'm not Jewish. Like, I really don't have any permission, I guess, to claim as my tradition these traditions. And so I don't. But the broken, shattered, and then reconstituted, reconstructed, resurrected, chimera, mutant form of magical words that we find in the Greco-Egyptian Magical Papyri are something that I feel that I can lay claim of relation to. I also am, a broken polyglot, Frankenstein thing that was kind of sewn together out of the remnants of several dying cultures. I very much relate to the parentage of the PGM and of the words in it and the rites in it, because our time rhymes with that time. We also are at an information explosion under the heel of empire, where people are forced to come to terms with each other, and no one, has a super obviously direct line of succession anymore. And in that confusion, there's like an incredible fertility that the cross-pollinations of unexpected combinations, unexpected mergers, and that lead to mutations, some of which, maybe even if it is like a very small number, are viable and take on that flame of life and become things in themselves, and those things in themselves are new traditions, if they survive.
The hybrid polyglot that you're talking about, the sort of esoteric Esperanto, is in itself a reversion of the mythical fall of the Tower of Babel and the fractioning of the primordial language into partial pieces, and that in turn is a analogical representation of the descent from the one into the many. And so by the reconstitution of the primordial language through Promethean artifice, we can re-enter into a sympathia with the logos hieratikos and create the enlinkment that enables the transmission of knowledge, power, and information from the celestial into the material and then back again.
I agree. And I see it also as someone acting out the myth of the severing and scattering of the members of the body of Osiris, where whether or not it is like a root language that is then fragmented and then kind of scattered forth and then gradually gathered back together and reanimated like a Frankenstein, you have also like between them like the scattering itself and the creation of a distance between these fragments of a tradition or of a language or of a people. But then as it gathers back together, between those fragments, you then have these shorelines, these high energy zones where change and magic is possible, these liminal spaces in between the joints of the severed and scattered body, of whether that was the body of magic itself as a tradition, or whether it's the body of the culture that these things all came from. But even if there wasn't like a single source code or source religion for them or source language for them, it is kind of I get most turned on by the interstitial spaces between them. When they are kind of brought back together, there's kind of the liminal, the little synapse in between the individual fragments. I feel like that is a something. It's not just a gap or an absence, of them being in union. It's not just, a little hairline's distance between the pieces. That's actually kind of where the magic happens. And so for them to be varied, to be different, and to be shattered and broken is, in my relationship, in my own particular uninitiated, just simple person playing with paper dolls understanding of the PGM, the brokenness of it is its source of its magic, and the varied nature of it, the fact that there are very few rites that you can point to and say this is exclusively Egyptian, or this is exclusively Greek, or this is a perfect rendition of something that came from the rites of Eleusis or such. Like it's almost like for there to be like a grand climactic battery of holy names, and the climax of a spell. It's like if it's all in one language or another, that's almost kind of like a mark against it now, because it's like it is having it be polyglot makes it something that then I can relate to, and that I feel that I can pronounce those words because it's like this isn't me pronouncing something that was intended for someone who's very much of a time and place, and that is an intimate a passage of intimate prayer between someone and their God within an intact religion. It's not that. It's rather than me LARPing as someone who is Jewish or someone who is an ancient citizen of Chem. Instead, it's when I see that there is that broken and reassembled quality to a spell, I feel the connection, and I feel then that I can step into it, and I feel that then I can freely invoke it and include it into my work. And as I do that, those fragments of the magical voices that have agency, that are animate, they definitely begin to operate even outside of the context of a particular spell. I find that there are, some of the phrases, if you just intoned those, mantra-like, or if you have the luxury of being able to just be very weird out loud for 24 hours a day, which is a blessed situation that I found myself in over the last few years, which is when everything really took off. Was I found that while I'm working in the studio, can just intone some of these names and words, all day long, there's something that can happen. And they, outside of the context of, I am doing a spell, and it towards the end it says Nathanalba Akramakamari, and I see them that way. Like when it's no longer like that, but when you just take those two words, let's say, and just start singing them to yourself out loud as you're doing the things, there's something special that happens, and you get to meet them.
Yeah, and it begs the question: how was this being done by people in a certain time and of a certain place? Were they just reading it off the page like a lot of us assumed, or some people assume, or was there something else going on, like you're saying, a little bit more of a lived expression? Or because let's be real, we really don't know how this stuff was performed, and we're kind of piecing it together to the best of our ability. And I think your trial and error methodology is probably one of the best for kind of making the best stab at maybe what was being done. You know what I mean?
Well, if you do it enough,
mm-hmm.
Patterns emerge, rhythms and meters
mm-hmm.
and cadences emerge, and also like how they want to be expressed now begins to emerge, like not just in different ways to do vocally with them, different melodies or tunes if you're singing them, but also translating them into written form, drawn form, sculpted form, and eventually it's the hot ones are the ones that are like very, very animate with much agency and that really seem to want to participate in the shaping of the world that we live in now. They want to, let's say, I guess I should put quotes around want. They appear to me in my own private practice and experience to desire to be translated into as many media as possible, to be interpreted not just in terms of here's all the different ways to sing it or say it or shout it or whisper it, or here's all the ways to calligraphy it or to draw it, but it then goes into here is the interpretation of this hymn into the kinetic form, into a dance, or into a solemn series of linked gestures, if you don't want to call it a dance, based upon the vowels. And so following the sequence of the directions attributed in PGM 13 to the vowels of a hymn, or at least of a divine name or series of names, can then create all that you need to have a directionally oriented kinetic expression of the hymn or of the litany of names or whatever it is that you're intoning. And from there, then how does it become olfactory? Well, let's take the 7 scents of the planets, also included in PGM 13 or in the 8th book of Moses, and create scents where you take the vowels of a magical word and you put in 1 drop of one of the 7 planetary essences or oils or scents, perfumes, according to as they appear in it. So Oblanoth and Alba would just be 6 drops of myrrh. Okay, so that's not as exciting. But once you get to Akramakamari, it is now 5 drops of myrrh, 1 drop of frankincense. When you get to Abraminto, you now have frankincense and myrrh. You now also have cassia and storax. And you can take it then from there with the addition of planetary scents according to the vowels in proportion. So I have a little rack of perfume bottles in which there is the olfactory interpretation of the voces magicae that I work with, so that I can then use these as offerings or to dress candles with or to anoint myself with before doing a ritual that is using those words. That ritual might include a little dance or kinetic interpretation of the prayer based upon the vowels once again, and the direction that those vowels correlate to. And so they give us the instructions, if we want, to then come up with these things that do not appear in the PGM. Like this is an idea that I kind of riffed on, and it just became self-proving in terms of pragmatically speaking, and formed a system that is not in the PGM. I would not publish a little book that says, this is the PGM system of kinetic prayer, or this is the PGM system of perfumery, because it's not. It started with some attributions in PGM 13 and got encouraged as I then pulled on that thread, and then it resulted in something that I enjoy and that adds to my own ritual praxis, and that I hope to include in the externalization of my own ritual praxis into the form of community celebration through these little parades. So the incenses, the things that we would be anointing ourselves with, the incenses that we'd be burning, and some of the factors of, the route, let's say, of the procession itself can be determined in part by the words that we'll be chanting during it. So you have it, the advent or appearance of the formula of a magical word now in the realm of scent, in the realm of direction or kinetic expression of procession, as well as in the form of the masks and vestments that the people would be wearing, or the banners that they'll be waving and what they'll be chanting. So gradually more and more of the senses and more of the realms that the senses pertain to are being incorporated in the expression of, in the celebration of these magical words and the spirits that write on them. And so that's, I feel, where the magic side and the art side of what I do meet is the fact that it turns out that art is merely a vehicle of magical expression. Art is simply the mechanism whereby certain forces are made to appear, except I'm not conjuring them in a circle such that there's faces appearing in the smoke. I'm making faces for them. It's no longer a matter of me presuming to conjure for my own enjoyment and at my own command a spirit into a circle. It is more like I have been conjured into the service of the spirits who want to appear. And they do want to have full physical appearance here in the world that we live in. And my job is to give them that. And I give them that by creating suitable masks and vestments, suitable expressions, kinetically, gesture and dance, suitable scents. And eventually, the realm of food will find we'll find the cookbook of the PGM, and we'll have a way for them to be culinarily experienced. And basically, it's through craft, giving them more and more expression and embodiment through all of the things that I make. And it gives, on the other side of that equation, humans, those of us who are attending and participating in these rites, we get to experience more and more of them. And it just kind of draws us all closer together. Like I find that as a very mutually reciprocal, mutually beneficial agreement and arrangement and relationship that can be cultivated by doing this. It's certainly revolutionized my life. Although, from someone looking from the outside, I also do appear to kind of like live a life that could be interpreted as like a prolonged psychotic break, because I spend most of my time, singing or talking to empty rooms while working on making masks for spirits.
Well, just say you're an artist, and that's kind of that covers you.
I live in the city where that's appropriate behavior, and it's expected for someone like me. So,
kind of following along this conversation, being that in Greco-Roman Egypt, the literacy rate was extremely low, and so that the people putting these works together were I guess you could say a minority of intellectuals or practitioners. I think the common understanding is that these were priests for the most part, which would indicate that there was a significant level of training that went on and initiation and whatnot. And for you, I know you've been doing these things for decades, and you live this life day in and day out, 24/7. I believe like this is on your mind for the most part. But generally speaking, because the PGM is, you can find it at Barnes and Noble. Can anyone, in your opinion, just pick up the PGM and just start immediately working it with none of the prerequisites? Or what kind of prerequisites would you say are necessary, if any?
A way that I describe my understanding of what you're asking about is not everyone's gay. Everyone has different kinks. Everyone has different sexual orientations, and anyone can do all types of things. You can do all types of things. Do you want to? Would you feel anything mutual from it? Would it be good for you and the other party? I don't know. That depends on your unique internal chemistry. That is your mystery. That's your thing. Similarly, with magic, if you were to see magic as referring to how you energetically, emotionally, intimately, essentially relate to others. Everyone has different kinks. So, maybe it's about a single paredros that you have a long-term committed relationship with, and that's the goal of it. Well, there are spells for that in the PGM that tell you, well, here's the protocols. And if you do this right, you don't have to do anything else, like just to get rid of the book. Like if you do this, and there's a few of them actually, for meeting your daimon or for, acquiring a paredros, or, the initiation in the 8th book of Moses, it's really about, receiving the word of your God. and now you're a magos. Like, you only need that from now on. And that's, very much describing a one-on-one, long-term committed relationship. Your significant other is this paredros or daimon or God, however it's experienced, but it's that's the one for you, and that's the one through whom you do the magic. If you are wired for long-term committed relationship, if you're wired to have a single significant other, it's there for you, and here's a set of, here's how to do. And if you are genuinely wired that way, I believe that if you engage that, single-mindedly, you will then make that connection and have that relationship. There's also a lot of spells in the PGM that appear to be very much not like that. They're, how to, it starts with how to acquire the temporary paredros that will help you to do just this one spell. And that's, when you get to the, go to the grave of someone who died violently and do this thing. And it's because you're temporarily employing one of the restless dead for the purpose of your magic. And if you're the type of person who can do that and can have all of these one-night stands with a wide variety of rough trade or just different spirits that are, not your paredros, not the single God-sent spirit who is there for you, but are just sort of like, well, you look like you're not doing anything and you look hungry, so I'm going to give you this. And I want you to bother that person for me and step back. I have a phylactery, but just do this thing and I'll take care of, so those are like one-off, single-serving companionship type relationships. And you might have a knack for that. I don't think most people do, because, most people aren't wanting necessarily to seek out, violently dead people and try to get their spirits to work for them. But some people have that as part of their persuasion. And so I feel like those people who are oriented in that way can form and profit from that type of relationship, but that's not everybody. And then there are some spells that seem to be more like, do something that references and rhymes with one of the gods in this myth that you obviously know because you grew up with this. And so you do like a little spell and it has a charm or like a little historiola as part of it. And that's another type of way to work this magic. And I think a lot of it is based on the assumption, at least for charms, are these little historiola spells. It's something you grew up with. It's something that's just baked in. And so if that's the case for you, or if you have reached a point in your life where you're so familiar with these myth cycles and they have moved you and informed your life to the point where it feels like it's baked in, then those could be the part of it that works for you. There's so many different types of operation referenced in the PGM. And I think that they appeal to a wide variety of different people. I think that they were compiled from operations that would be used for, a wide variety of people in terms of their class and their particular religious persuasion and their own temperament. And some things would work for some things would work for another. I don't think that there is one person who did all of the different operations that we have recorded in the body of notes that we call the PGM. I think they were just kind of gathering as much as they could because they were aware of how much was dying and going out of existence. And they were aware that even as knowledge was being hoarded in the libraries of Alexandria, that there was a lot that was going to be a lot of these initiatory lineages and a lot of these sacred temple libraries, all these things were going extinct. And so I think people were just grabbing as many fragments as they could from the shattered traditions around them. And some of them were relevant, to the person who was writing it down. You'll have them have notes of, this is good or has been done 9 times or whatever in the notes. And then some of them I think are just like, oh, here's another one. here's a spell to do that thing that the one immediately above it does, except this one is, if they're Christian, use this one instead. Right. We'll do the same gradual erasure of a magical word to get rid of their fever, but we're going to do it in the name of Jesus in this case because there's these things called Christians now, and so we're gonna like create spells that appeal to them because they don't like to have non-Christian gods mentioned.
let me focus in and give you a quick scenario, because I think your thought process is fascinating, and I love your perspective on these things. So, do you think there's any difference in, say, a fully initiated Egyptian priest drawing a phylactery with all the associated magicae, the magical words? Do you think there's any difference between that individual creating that and an uninitiated layperson doing the same thing? Is it just as effective, in your opinion?
I don't think that it is identical. I think that it's a roll of the dice. I think that it's I kind of see it as one of the things you can try is we know what the word was that people said whenever in the rites of let's say whatever a mystery school they were a part of, and we have it passed down because someone who was defrocked decided that vowels be damned, I'm going to pass on my word that I'm supposed to give if I'm ever confronted with a punishing spirit or whatever. I'm gonna, I know that we're supposed to say this thing, and it's from one of the rites, but I'm just gonna record it anyway because that school may or may not even be available anymore because a lot of these the initiatory things where lineages were broken, and so then you have the question of so from a broken tradition. Do the gods or the forces of a tradition, the temple of which has been turned into barracks, do they mind as much if one of the uninitiates call upon their name? Perhaps when you had like an entire like city of initiate priests who were those who had the proprietary, the intellectual property of that deity's names and signs. And, it would be woe unto those who are not initiate who would call upon these or use these signs, etc. But then things changed in that suddenly that city of initiates is no longer there. In fact, maybe that name or that aspect of that god is only existing in human memory and practice in the form of a name that you call on as part of a phylactery or as part of a protection charm in as a footnote in a spell in the PGM. Or it's I think that unless that divine power was kind of done with participating with humanity, and it was just like, okay, if temples are gone, I'm gonna go dead. But if it had wished to persist and to continue participating, I would think that it would be it would like first people to call upon it, even though it's definitely not from the point of view as an initiate priest saying, hey, I'm one of yours, protect me, because I am part of the order that serves you exclusively, and that shaves off my body hair and washes 4 times a day. Rather than that, it's now I'm calling upon this name in need and with faith, and this is maybe the only time in centuries that name has been called on in need and with faith.
Yeah.
And I feel that there's something that responds to that and replies to that,
Okay.
and that doesn't see it as an insult.
Sure. No, nicely put. I'm coming at it from the reason I asked is because I was thinking of mantra practice in Buddhism, and mantra are used for quote unquote magical effects or blessings in a lot of places and times. But it's thought that the mantra won't work for you unless you have a strong actual practice, like you are participating in precepts, you have made vows, you are doing all the things, and that's what makes the mantra available to you or able to work, so to speak. I mean? So that's kind of the prerequisite that I was kind of thinking, that maybe the priests would have like a practice that enabled them to kind of tune in to that
Certainly.
power. You know what I mean?
I believe that once you get through the novelty, so first off, there's going to be once you just start, even before you get to the foothills of actual integrated praxis with any of these, you kind of have like the plane of novelty where these are exotic, magical, ancient names that you have not yourself ever pronounced out loud or written as a charm. And there is a certain flair that comes with something being, this is the first time that you're doing it, and it feels so magical, and there's a something, and that something, that spark is definitely can push the needle over to the successful side of the spectrum. And it does it once, or it does it like maybe a few times. And then as soon as things are familiar, you now realize that having expended the thrill, you can either find something else to thrill yourself with, or you can then realize like, oh, like there's a relationship I'm supposed to cultivate with this if I want to go further with it. Like once again, to go back to the relationship metaphor, you realize like now there's an actual, and then how do you do that? Do you, incorporate it into a daily ritual, or do you give yourself, a certain number of repetitions or certain number of hours singing it to enliven it, to warm it up, or to integrate it, to animate it as part of your magical body? And then that really depends on, what influences you have upon you, what guidance you might receive from those daimonists that you are already in touch with, or that want to be in touch with you, or what you have found to be effective. It's without transplanting systems to systems haphazardly. Although I just spent the last 2 hours talking about how what a big fan of the syncretism I am, but also that doesn't necessarily mean there are so many ways to do it wrong, and I've done most of the ways to do it wrong, and I know that I will do it wrong the rest of the ways you can do it wrong in the future. I'm not saying that I'm not. If there's one thing I'm good at, it's at doing it wrong. But from doing it wrong so many times, I have found that there are ways where you can transpose, there is, upon receiving of a mantra, there is a period during which you bring it to life in your life through focused marathon of repetition, and you kind of do a thing with it, and that I have found is not directly applicable, but is indirectly applicable to this, because I use things like that when I am taking a word and am bringing it into my life. I will chant it, sometimes formally, I'm going to, I'll make a prayer necklace for it, and of a suitable number, and we'll use that for X number of days or whatever, and I'll do it something that looks a little bit at least recognizable to formal mantra practice with it, although I do not call it that. But I sometimes it takes the form of I just sing it and or speak it out loud in as many different ways as I can until I kind of settle on a way that it wants to be said and a way that it wants to be sung. And I do that. And once again, I have the luxury of being able to be out loud about this type of thing, because there's a place where I'm able to do it, and I'm usually not around people. And I spent, once these things were really coming to life to me, I, was in that place, like a whole winter for days on end, just singing and reciting and intoning these words. And they, through that process of being present in the atmosphere around me, by being enacted, or by being created anew again and again, by being made, they then, inhabiting the space around me, could then take on a little bit more agency, directing how it is that they wanted to be expressed. And so they came alive, they became more dense, and they attracted the corresponding spirits, I think, that answer to them, or that compose them, or that ride on them, however it works. And then that started a process where, obviously the next thing is I'm now doing this. And suddenly I would find there's a medium through which this particular word wants to be expressed. I want to express this word in the form of, I want to do it kinetically, or I want to do it in the form of of a mask, or I want to do it in the form of a wood burning, or depending. And, there's a lot of factors that kind of go into the medium through which they're expressed, the material, and then how and why. And that kind of all depends on, what time of year it is and what's going on with me at the moment, and also what the word is that wants to be expressed that way.
Okay. So would you say that a devotional practice, because a lot of this sounds like sort of devotional practice, including offerings and things like that, creates the atmosphere where this is more viable as far as
I find that to be the case in my own practice.
Yeah.
However, my own practice is able to continue because evidently, like, they, or at least someone, wants it to, because I have been enabled to do things the way I do it. Because it's incredibly inefficient and way overcomplicated. Like I do not hold myself up as an example of how to find a modern expression of the praxis of the PGM. I'm mostly a series of warnings. I'm sort of like, don't do it this way because you'll end up like that guy. And by that guy, I mean me.
I'm holding you up as the example.
Oh, come on. I would not wish this on anybody. No, it's
May I interject? May I jump in for a minute? When you're doing I think voces magicae is maybe a little bit better than nomina barbara because they're not unintelligible names. We can look at them and with an understanding of the Egyptian language, Sumerian, Greek, Hebrew, we can at this point, a person with a sort of basic understanding of those languages can identify a lot of what they mean. When you're saying them though, and you're repeating them, I have a few considerations I want to ask you about. Number one, when you're repeating a formula, say like the Mascali formula or the 99 name or the Harpon Knufi formula, when you're repeating it over and over again, do you experience shifts in consciousness? Have you had any visionary experiences? Have you had any dreams or theophanies triggered by the consistent use of this, where you're internalizing these voces magicae, much like a mantra is internalized, to the point where, I imagine you're probably sometimes just unintentionally even dreaming these words. That's the first question.
Okay, they definitely, so they do come about, and visions happen in the form of, it happens through materializing in the mundane world, in that my life gets adjusted towards the direction I'm supposed to go, and the things that I am making become possible, like the resources and opportunities to create start being attracted to me, and then in the making itself, they emerge, and I see things with my physical eyes, because there's now an object that is now reflecting. That is the epiphany. And so I can get ideas or inspirations and like a little, inrush of enthusiasm and the motivation to do certain things. They don't show up as freestanding visions. I don't see like a luminous form that I then copy when I make the image. It's more like I know that I am to make an image. I'm able to make the image, the resources and the opportunity to make the image come about, and the compulsion is there, so that it's sort of like, yes, I did sign up for this, but also we're now at the point where I've been awake so many days working on this. It becomes like that sort of compulsive type of thing. But then it appears, and then it's like, wow, you are so much more than what I could have myself imagined and fabricated. I'm shocked and amazed and euphoric to see this emerge from my hands, and that is the epiphany of the God. And there was the inspiration to do it. There was like a thumbnail image, perhaps, of kind of what it was supposed to be, but it didn't like show up as a freestanding, luminous, interior form that I'm referencing and making what I'm making. It's like I see it for the first time as it emerges from my hands, from the mask or the material that I'm working on. And, when it's shocking, when I'm both terrified and also in love with it, is how I know it's an epiphany of the God. And that does happen. I mean, that is kind of like those are the climactic moments that punctuate my life. And then the rest of my life is like doing doing the busy work to get to the point where that can happen. And so yeah, that is how they appear to me. I sleep very irregularly, and so my dreams are no longer like as much a factor of my life as they once were. I used to have like kind of like a very vivid dream life, but that was when my circadian rhythms were very different than they are now. And so I experience the appearance of the gods through the actions of my hands now, and they appear as they are made, but it's kind of so taking the Egyptian word for to make or to do. So you have Ari or Eri, which was the eye hieroglyph, and then you have the Furi or the Kefir hieroglyph to become. I like to think that what I do is to combine that. You have the eye and the scarab, or Furieri, which would be like I make by becoming, and that sort of is the formula that I pursue creatively, is to make become rather than make believe. It's like, yes, this is all make believe, but to me it's make become, and that is to craft the forms whereby the gods become, are the images of the gods become, or I craft the forms whereby we can become the vehicles or eidolons of the gods in the context of ritual and celebratory procession. And that's how they appear to me. It's kind of it has to be sensible to the senses. I'm not very magically gifted in that way. Like a lot of the results of doing an invocation to try to receive a vision, my conscious mind rarely receives, even though I spend the time sitting there, silently in the dark to scry or to receive the vision. It's not my conscious mind that receives it. If I do that thing to receive the vision, it still happens, but it doesn't happen such that I, looking, into a glass or dish or with my eyes closed, usually do not see like a luminous image of the spirit or daimon or God or whatever. It's more like I do that and I receive the ideas of what I need to be doing next. Or even if I don't receive the ideas of what I need to be doing next, I find myself still doing it the next day. And I find my ability to do it kind of miraculously present. I find that I attract things that they want, or that it appears to me that I attract the things that they want. People bestow jewelry collections upon me, and I find among the jewelry collections beautiful images greater than I could imagine or fabricate, beautiful tokens or icons or sigils of the gods that I'm currently invoking. So when I was really in the honeymoon phase of my devotions to Aphrodite, and was, doing a period of daily devotions to her, at the climax of that, so a client of mine then kind of bestowed upon me or bequeathed to me their jewelry collection, and it was like, it was just like high grade costume jewelry. So it's not like diamonds or anything, but it was like very beautiful, very precious costume jewelry, all of which would be absolutely appropriate for what I do, which is I make costumes and masks. And among them was an image, this just gorgeous, just shockingly beautiful image of carved into shell of this, profile of a woman that was so obviously Venus, but was so of such taste and was so classy and was so gorgeous and amazing. And it became like the actual icon or seat of Venus now on my Venus altar. And it, was just, I didn't seek that out. I wasn't looking for a form for her to invest herself into. It's just that by invoking her for a period of time, at the climax, suddenly there is a materialization in the form of a carved shell brooch that was bestowed upon me as part of a jewelry collection that is now being incorporated into the masks. The various brooches and things from that collection become incorporated into the masks that I make as kind of like seats for spirits. And that particular brooch, is incorporated into my Venus altar, kind of as if I were to locate her, so to speak, anywhere in the altar, Although, of course, I have, an image of her that I adore and adorn. But next to it is a brooch that is, in my opinion, kind of the form that she chose for me and appeared to me in that. And so I venerate that as well. And so for me, that's an epiphany of Venus, and I treat it as such. And it has that factor of the timing, which is it showed up, unbidden. It just showed up like, oh wow, this is a pleasant surprise, towards the peak of a period of devotions, of ritual invocations and devotions, and it is it's more than what I could imagine. It has the extra something that is it's not just me asking for something and getting it. It's me doing devotions and then there being an epiphany at the climax of those devotions, and that epiphany being something more than what I could imagine, more than what I could ask for. And that for me is the stamp of godhood upon it, that it showed up in that. And so I get things like that, but it didn't show up in the form of me having, an image in my mind. I feel like the particular configuration of senses and qualities and abilities that I am is like, I'm just designed to do a certain thing, and I do that thing. And I would like to be a more, well-rounded person. And I do work towards developing some of the, vestigial senses and faculties, and trying to ameliorate some of the excess elements that I have. But it also turns out that I don't think I was really meant to be like a, perfectly balanced, well-rounded person. I was meant to be the type of person that does this thing that I do all the time. And I'm given the ability to do that and the resources and opportunity to do that. And I'm very grateful for that. But it also means I'm actually becoming more imbalanced in particular ways, because I'm leaning into my talents, but my talents are mostly based on and derived from imbalances. And so it results in kind of becoming more and more self-alienated as I realize, like, I have more work to do. I have more in queue of daimonists that want form, that want embodiment, than I can in this lifetime actually fulfill. And I haven't worked out a reasonable way to moderate the flow of inspiration and enthusiasm such that I can do things other than work or recover from working. So there's that. Let that be a warning to you. It's sort of like I haven't watched TV in like 2 years. Like it's not because I'm against it. I don't have a moment to sit down, much less watch something. Like if I'm awake, I'm working towards one or another project. And so
let's not be mistaken. I mean, you enjoy this work
it's the only thing that I do enjoy, though. I mean, that's the thing, is I'm doing the thing that makes me happy. It's just like it makes me happy in a rather alienated and peculiar way that also exacerbates my existing systemic imbalances. So there's that. Like, I'm aware enough of the fact of knowing that I have to find ways to self-balance, or to do things like but I find it's by expanding the scope of my work, not by contracting it. For example, by considering where I live, to be, at least in my own private phantasmal reality, the temple grounds. That means I incorporate yard work and gardening into what I do devotionally as a keeper of a temple. And so that gets me outside, that gets me in the sunlight, that gets me doing physical work that doesn't involve, holding a Dremel or paintbrush or glue gun or scissors. And it gets me, doing something more than just sitting in a studio or in a temple, either doing invocations or doing the creative work that materializes the resulting enthusiasm of those invocations. And although that loop is the primary thing of my life, which is, go upstairs to the temple, invoke, change out of robes, come downstairs to the workshop, craft. And that's how I kind of fulfill the will, so to speak, of, invoke, receive vision, execute vision, polish the materialization of the vision, use that materialized item in the next round of invocations and continue following the Ouroboros of self-feeding creative inspiration onward forever until your body dies. And
there are worse things.
I'm not complaining. I just
I know.
I verbalize like that I'm aware of the imbalances associated.
I love the awareness.
Just because once you stop being aware of it, you that's when you then become the demiurge trapped in a solipsistic loop, and that's when you become someone who's feverishly, trying to get someone's attention, and you go over to them and they're showing you a napkin with a Kabbalistic equation sharpied onto it with a bunch of exclamation points, and they knowingly nod at you because you get it and you don't, but you nod as well, and then there but for the grace of God go I. And so I verbalize the systemic dysfunctions that I notice within myself for the sake of not losing track of them and falling into that solipsistic loop.
Perfect.
The private hell of I am I.
So Joseph, I think we're going on like 2.5 hours at this point.
Oh goodness,
which is I think is a record for us. So I don't want to forget this piece. So you do make vestments. You do make all sorts of tabards and banners and along with your masks, and you do provide these to the public for sale. Where can people find this artwork?
I do have an Etsy shop, and the name of it is The Aruniverse, and I'll get that to you so that you can include it in the show notes. And that is where you can find some of the things that I make, and it's mostly templeware type stuff. I make these things originally for my own use, and then I have the screens, and I'm like, oh, I can make more of these because it's like I use screen printing, and so doing like the planetary sequence of the 7 planetary deities and other, temple crafting type themes. I make those, and once they're on screen, I can continue making them and then incorporate them into either my own rituals and processions, or others can do the same with theirs. And then the result of selling them is that it then just feeds immediately back into the temple and allows me to then create more things for the processions and for the ever evolving chapels here.
So I don't want to open a can of worms, but are you open to accepting like commissions for mask making? Okay.
I am. And so you can find me with The Aruniverse. There's The Aruniverse on Facebook is a interface, and then there's The Aruniverse on Etsy is another one. Both of those are kind of my mercantile hubs. And then there is Hekantheros is where that you can find on Facebook, and then also you can find on Patreon, and that is like about like what I'm doing with the processions. And so it is Hekantheros. And like if you want to talk about like the processions and about like the ritual side of my work, it's Hekantheros. If you want to talk about the mercantile, like you want one of the things that I make, go through the Aruniverse.
I just want to thank you for providing a portrait of a person who's engaging directly with this material in an interactive fashion. I think the daimonic element of this is important. People need to understand the intermediary and linking nature of the daimonies. Daimons are the means by which we are connected to the divine worlds. And so that when you give them embodiment, when you give them enfleshment, when you give them soma, they are able to act through this world and have points of contact with this world. And it doesn't have to be in this rigid way. We're not people living 2,000 years ago. We're people living here and now. And the world we live in now, in some ways, is very different. And the gods are still present, and the daimons are still present. And so there's a more practical approach that involves working with what we have now in the here and now, and making it something lived and present and relevant to our time. I think our guest, and I think our guest really embodies that, really makes it happen. And I think that's important.
I find that they are very interested in what we are doing now, and I am very interested in what they are doing now. I feel like that kind of sums it up in terms of the formula. Is like they haven't stopped. They're not trying to act as if it were 2,000 years ago. They are doing things now, and that fascinates me. And they're interested in what we are doing now, and coming from your time and place sincerely with them to them results in them meeting you here, and meeting us and becoming part of our lives, which is much more valuable than play acting it being 2,000 years ago in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is something that I'm sure it's great if someone does it, but it's not what I want to do. Like I want them to live with me here and now, and us to have a reciprocal relationship, and that's what I do.
Nicely put. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Joseph.
Thank you so much. I had a lovely time.
Okay, that was Joseph Clinton Ragan, genius when it comes to making ensouled, animated, daimonically energized ritual.
And we're not saying demonically energized. Let's make the distinction there.
Right. We're talking about daimones. If you don't know what daimones are, refer back to our episodes with Angela Voss, with Edward Butler, with Gregory Shaw, with Christopher Plaisance, and you'll get a better idea of what we mean by daimones. Also, the episode we did with John Opsopeus on Platon. We've done several articles on episodes on late antique theurgy. So if you need to understand the context of daimons, that's the way to go. Daimons are intermediary spirits, and the word daimon in antiquity did not mean demon. The word daimon was actually demonized to represent kakodaimones, which are just evil daimons. Daimon just means spirit. A god can be a daimon, a big spirit. Then you have your personal daimon, your attendant daimon. Then you have the daimons that are in the prohodos, the procession of the god, who carry the vivifying power of the deity into matter, and then transmit it into the forms and the receptacles of matter. The prohodos leads into the hypodoke. So if you're unfamiliar with that idea, revisit our episodes on that topic and you'll understand. But we love him. His art is super cool. And also, I think that we may not have touched on the fact that a lot of it is actually very practical. He has banners with the divine names of different deities. For instance, there's a beautiful one with Horus in his falcon form with the sacred words on it. There's a beautiful caduceus one he makes in honor of Hermes. He makes a really interesting one for the goddess with the interlocking moons. And these are great temple banners. They're great.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Great things to have in your temple to energize your temple and animate the space with the energy of the sacred letters and vowels and names of the deities. And then he makes these masks, and he just does all kinds of incredible things. And so I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend you check out his Etsy page. He ships worldwide. So, there's a lot there. You can check it out at his Etsy, and you can check him out on Facebook. We really can't say enough good about him. And he was being humble, but this is somebody who actually has several decades of magical experience under his belt. So he's not just somebody who jumped on the PGM train like half the internet at this point. He is someone who has been very seriously studying and practicing magic all of his life and understands the context of this particular material. I mean, you heard him talking, Dom, about how in childhood, him and his brother were obsessed with Egyptian things and Egyptian lore.
We both know him personally as well, and he's just a great guy, super dynamic, super sweet dude. He's passionate, doing what he loves. Can't say enough good things about what he's doing. So yeah, definitely check out his Etsy page.
Yes, absolutely. So I have a book today. Are we prepared for that point?
Yep, let's do it.
I have a book which fits nicely with this episode. It is a great one. I consider it a classic, and it connects into the subject matter of this episode. So I think that anyone listening will find it useful. If you are unfamiliar with this book, I think it pays for you to look into it if you're interested in this subject matter. It is called Arcana Mundi, Magic and the Occult in the Greek and Roman Worlds. It was written by George Luck. It is a collection of ancient texts, so he translated, annotated, and introduced them. It was published by Johns Hopkins University Press. Now, magic, miracles, daimonology, divination, astrology, and alchemy were the arcana mundi, the secrets of the universe of the ancient Greeks and Romans. So this is a source book of this material, as it was practiced by witches, sorcerers, magi, astrologers, and others, goetes, in the Greek and Roman worlds. And so it has several chapters. The first chapter is magic. The second chapter is miracles. The third chapter is daimonology. So you could pick this book up and read some source texts on Daimons if you're interested. Divination, astrology, alchemy. There's a select bibliography, index of ancient sources. And I mean, he's drawing on all kinds of sources. Homer, Apollonius of Rhodes, Horace, Virgil, Seneca, Tacitus, the different magical papyri, the Paris, the Leyden Magical Papyrus, Philostratus, Porphyry, Iamblichus, Seneca, Plutarch, Ptolemy, Apuleius, Zosimus. We had an excellent episode on Zosimus of Panopolis with Shannon Grimes, one of my all-time favorite episodes that we did. And that's another interesting one you could listen to if you're interested in this subject matter. But this is just excellent. Like if I flip open to the daimonology chapter, there's quotes, daemons and spirits of the dead. And there's a nice introduction, ghosts and related phenomena, philosophers on daimons, guardian spirits, even pagans, Christians, and skeptics on daimons. And again, this is all drawn from the sources, but then he gives you context of the sources, including actual source texts. So there's Homer's Odyssey quoted here, there's Hesiod and his works and days, Aeschylus, Plato's Apology of Socrates, Pausanias's Description of Greece. This is all in the chapter on daimons, Seneca's, Lucan. So you have really just a wonderful book here. If you're interested in divination, here's Cicero on divination, talking about a famous oracle given to the wealthiest ruler of Asia Minor. If I flip over to magic, here we have Theocritus and his idols talking about love magic with the Yinks and with Aphrodite and with the Arcadian herb that was used in this context and the lizard that was used in a particular spell. So it's just, you have Horace is here, Horice, the writer. So this is a wonderful book. It really helps you to understand what magic was like in that world and at that time. And the introductions alone in these chapters are worth it because he really gives you wonderful contextual illustration to help you understand. And he also goes into the Greek, into the Roman, into the Hebrew cultures. So this book, Arcana Mundi, is excellent if you're interested in the papyri because it helps you to understand the sort of cultural melting pot and how this magic arose and how it was practiced and who it was practiced by. And then it's not just a study that's saying all of that, but it's giving you the ancient sources so that you can examine them yourself. So for somebody who is an operative practitioner, this is worth its weight in gold. It's a very nice little book. It's called Arcana Mundi, Magic in the Greek and Roman Worlds by George Luck, Georg with no E.
Great. Thank you very much for that. I think we are done for this episode. Thank you all for listening. We appreciate your listenership. Please find us on all the different platforms. Give us a like on those platforms and a review if you feel up to it. Other than
guys, one like, one prayer. One like, one prayer.
See you in the next episode.